Hello friends, we are on the last leg of the series that we run on the short story from Europe, and the series has been quite successful, and it has evoked interest in the audience for this particular genre, which was not focused upon in literary criticism as much as poetry and the novel. And I think that was the purpose of the series, and maybe we have 1 or 2 more months to last it, but then finally we have to shift to another series. So today's lecture by Professor Payal Nagpal, who teaches English in Janki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University, would be on Turgenev or Turgenev, as she would prefer to call it. There are 2 pronunciations, and it's a Russian name, so we have to be sure whether the one or the other is correct, or both are correct. I'm very open on this. I think both are correct. It depends on how we pronounce it, what is the habit that we have to pronounce it. Turgenev is known as a kind of novelist, and he belongs to the pre-revolutionary era, as Professor Payal Nagpal would tell you, in Russia. And he was accused of being, in the Marxist terminology, some kind of a naturalist. And when I thought that he was a naturalist, then I thought I would ask Professor Payal Nagpal to comment on this. And the second thing that I would raise in the beginning itself is regarding his comparison with Zola, who was a predecessor, who was senior to him in age, and both of them were perhaps together in their role as writers in the 19th century and the early 20th century, and the kind of edge they gave to the short story apart from their novels. So these are the things that occurred to me just before I introduced the topic to you, and now it is over to Professor Payal Nagpal, who will just discuss 1 or 2 stories from Turgenev, and let's see how the points are made and how she responds to it.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So as mentioned, today we will be looking at 2 short stories by Turgenev, and one is The Rendezvous and the other is A Correspondence. This is a painting of Ivan Turgenev of 1874. Now, Turgenev was born in 1818 and he lived to about 1883. And in terms of classification, I think he belongs to the realist period, and his contemporaries would be Flaubert and Tolstoy, with whom he also had a very difficult relationship. It's interesting to note that Turgenev was part of, he's belonged to the aristocracy. He also traveled quite a bit. So didn't always stay in Russia, but also stayed in Baden, or also in Paris at times. But to answer the point, address the point that was raised by Professor Prakash about him being a naturalist. In a sense, yes, but he belonged more to the realist period, and his writing is very different from the kind of naturalism that Zola exhibits in his writing, which is later. So Turgenev can be credited with writing a lot of short stories, novellas, novels, and one of the most famous ones is also the Sportsman's Sketches, in which he portrays, he belonged to the aristocracy from the landowning class, but his experience of having seen the peasantry and his experience of having seen the serfs, this was something that he actually presented in the form of sketches. So for instance, Horan Kalinic and Yermole and the miller's wife. So lots of these sketches that emerged. So if we and they're very descriptive. He's like the dispassionate observer who's looking at things around him, and he's writing about it. So if we just look at one of the sketches to understand what this kind of writing, really speaking, is. So he writes that there is a peasant who is not tall, is bent in figure, sullen and suspicious in his looks. He lives in wretched little hovels of aspen wood, labors as a serf in the fields, and engages in no kind of trading, is miserably fed, wears slippers of bast. The rent-paying peasant of Kaluga lives in roomy cottages of pine wood. He is tall, bold, and cheerful in his looks. So I think the two things, the differences brought out very clearly. And it is often said that it is because of these sketches and of course, a lot of his other work, that attention was drawn towards the condition of serfs in Russia. And this is what eventually, in the early 1860s, led to the abolition of serfdom. So, uh, which is why, I would say that he belongs more to the tradition of realism that depicts society as it is in the most dispassionate way, taking on from, the idea of observer, the writer as observer of the 18th century. I think this is something that, he displays in his writing. So, today, the short story, however, we are going to discuss here, and also a story titled A Correspondence, they reflect on Turgenev's description and delineation of the women characters. And we are talking about, approximately mid-19th century Russia. So what were really speaking the concerns of the women? Another important aspect related to this is how he also associates their characterization with the class to which they belong. And this is a very remarkable aspect of Turgenev's writing. And I would also request Professor Prakash to share his thoughts on, something like the sportsman sketches and Turgenev's own description of the peasants and serfs.
Viewers, first I correct myself. I thought that Turgenev was the late 19th, early 20th century writer, but he lived only in the 19th century. And thanks, you corrected me on this. Now my entire, critical map changes with this particular time segment, because then he was a contemporary of Karl Marx, he was a contemporary of Flaubert, as you rightly pointed out, and he lived through the 19th century. And when he wrote initially, then naturalism, in fact, had not come into being. So that's the point that in fact, I would request her later to also tell us what kind of realism it was. But then he was in the company of these great realists like Flaubert and Balzac. That's one part. And secondly, you have very correctly told me about the placement and then the influences that he would have got from the world in which he lived. So he was close to, for instance, to Europe. There's a part of Russia that is a part of Europe also. And then, he was very sophisticated. And particularly the sophistication came from his birth. He was a born aristocrat. And he would, not touch upon things, very crudely or what. He would have all the finesse. And particularly his penchant for writing, sketches shows that he wanted to paint the history of his time from his angle. So his angle is important, which is, as you say, a realist angle. And then writing sketches means that he's just taking a look at and he observes the scene around him, the people. And what interests me now more from Professor Payal Nagpal's angle is his selection of women as characters and the way they behaved, the way they responded to their challenges at that time. So I think that's where you would help us understand Turgenev better.
Yes. So one of the things that we've in this particular series, we've looked at some French writers. We've looked at short stories by Balzac, by Flaubert, by Zola, and especially in the writings of Balzac and Flaubert, there is a kind of layered, complexity that is there. It's realism of a slightly different kind. But in Turgenev's writing, there is a kind of simplicity that is very endearing. It's a kind of simplicity that allows you to relate to what he is writing and the society that he is showing, and you're almost compelled to draw parallels, with your own context. Let's say, in India, for instance, and he very correctly uses the term sketches because it's almost as if it's what he's seeing. And when you're painting, when you're drawing, there is imagination, but at times, you know, it is what you see that you kind of sketch, that you paint. And if we just look at the first few lines of the short story titled The Rendezvous, which was interestingly, in a big way translated only around 1907. So he writes, I was sitting in a birch grove in autumn near the middle of September. It had been drizzling ever since morning. Occasionally, the sun shone warmly. The weather was changeable. Now the sky was overcast with watery white clouds. Now it suddenly cleared up for an instant, and then the bright, soft azure, like a beautiful eye, appeared from beyond the dispersed clouds. I was sitting, looking about me and listening. The leaves were slightly rustling over my head, and by their very rustle, one could tell what season of the year it was. Now, I'd just like to comment on these lines. First and foremost, they're extremely poetic, but very, very simple, and it's the narrator describing the weather as he sees it. Rendezvous is the French word for meeting, and the meeting here is between a girl who's from the very ordinary class. She's probably from the peasantry, and there is a man who's at max probably the valet, as the story points out. Maybe he's the valet in a particular household. And he is leaving with his master the next day, and he's come to break this news to this beautiful young girl. And here is the narrator who's at some distance and who's watching this scene. So there is a writer, and there is the writer's observer, and there is a narrator who's the observer. And the narrator observes the sensitivity in this girl and the very cold-hearted and almost crass behavior of the man. And it tells us about the kind of faith that Turgenev invests in his women characters. And even if one reads his novels, one can see that in the novels also, the women characters are greatly associated with what is natural, and they are totally invested in nature. So they are, in a sense, one can say, kind of the whole aspect of nature and a nurturing element that is there in the women characters. But it's not as if they are shown to be totally domesticated. They have a mind of their own, and Turgenev shows them exactly the way he sees them in the society. So the season, he says, is it suddenly changes. It's drowsy prattle. So he, having admired the surrounding view, the narrator, he falls asleep, and he says that it was a tranquil, sweet sleep, which is familiar to hunters. So the bit about the hunters is interesting here, because they are in the woods, and the real hunter is actually the man who's probably the valet who's targeted this young girl. So he says that he was about to kind of try his luck at hunting again, when his eyes fell on this young girl, and he describes the girl, and I'd read out the description. He says that she was sitting some 20 feet away from me, her head bowed pensively and her hands dropped on her knees. In her one hand, which was half open, lay a heavy bunch of field flowers, and every time she breathed, the flowers were softly gliding over her skirt. A clear white shirt buttoned at the neck, and complete description. And at the end of it, he says she was not at all bad looking. And so here is this girl who's sitting over there. She's waiting for the beloved to come, and suddenly when she sees this man, she's happy, and then she's also she turns pale. She's confused. She doesn't know how to respond, because this man is going to leave. So the narrator is not particularly impressed by this man, and he says, I confess he did not produce a pleasant impression upon me. He was, by all appearances, a spoiled valet of some rich young man. His clothes betokened a claim to taste and smart carelessness. So this man is obviously the metaphor of the hunter makes complete sense here. So he's dressed very properly because he's probably wearing his master's short top coat of bronze color, and he wears a pink necktie and lilac colored edges. So one can see that as a writer, Turgenev gives us the complete detailing of all his characters. The build up of the scene is there, so to say. And like a lot of the other writers of this time, I think this detailed description is important, as it is important to also acknowledge the fact that Turgenev is presenting characters not from the aristocracy, but from these are the commoners. The man is a valet, and here is this girl. So, he says that he has a lot of work to do, and he says that, we are leaving tomorrow, the we being the master and him. So, and this young girl, Akulina, is very upset about it. And, he just completely dismisses her and says, if you don't stop, I'll leave you right away. What nonsense to whimper. So he has absolutely no respect for this girl's sentiments, and she's the one who's very upset at this the severing of this relationship. So he says that, well, I'll not forget you, only you had rallier be sensible. Don't make a fool of yourself, obey your father, and I'll not forget you. So now suddenly this young girl, who probably thought that she might have a good life with this man who's the valet, she's suddenly being abandoned and is being told that, well, you need to obey your father. So there are very limited options, in a sense, that this girl has, and I think Turgenev here is really speaking, drawing attention to the kind of options that the girls from the peasantry had. And I'd request again Professor Prakash to comment on what he really thinks about this kind of detailing that Turgenev provides.
No, I think it's a very graphic scene. Every detail has been completely captured, and yet those details speak for themselves. Like that there is a character, and then there is the author, and the two are different from each other. And it's the character, the narrator, who's observing the scene, and he is not impressed by the valet at all, and he has his sympathies for the girl. So it's a very dramatized scene. And in this sketch, it's actually a sketch where people are sketched, where their lineaments and their temperament and their dialogue, their phrases that they use, all of them bear some weight of the writer and the narrator. So I think it's artistically a very good story.
Yes.
It is actually a kind of a drawing that we see, and in that drawing, the helplessness of the girl, as you rightly point out, that helplessness is very clearly etched through the description. I like the language, very short sentences as you were reading, and then drawing all the time the attention of the author, of the reader, towards certain things that he wants the reader to observe.
And Turgenev very clearly, draws out the difference between this girl, Akulina, and, the man. He's just, he's so dismissive, brusque, and absolutely crass in his behavior with Akulina. And what's very interesting is, and this is something that one sees in Turgenev's other works also, is the association of women, as I said earlier also, with nature, and the kind of wisdom that they have. So for instance, Akulina understands flowers very well. So she's not a foolish girl. So she says, flowers, I have picked some field stanzies, she went on with some animation. They are good for the calves. And here I have some marigolds for scrofula. So here is this girl who has, kind of, she understands the value, the medicinal value in a sense of the flowers. I'm reminded of Bazarov's mother in the novel Fathers and Sons, who understands, what really speaking the flowers and the plants are good for. So it is this kind of wisdom that he places, in a sense, at the center of this short story. It's a very, very short story, and she says that she brings in another flower and says that, these are forget-me-nots, and these I have picked for you. So she says, taking from under the tansies a small bunch of cornflowers tied around with a thin blade of grass, and she asks, do you want them? So, and he is constantly, treating her like this child who doesn't understand anything, and says that, well, you are not a foolish girl, don't talk nonsense. And he says that, you are not altogether a peasant, so to say, and your mother wasn't always a peasant either. Still, you are without education. Therefore, you must obey when you are told to. So, this man is, he does not, obviously does not value her, but his comments also draw attention to the fact that the mother probably was not from the peasantry, but is married into the peasantry, and we know that Akulina has not received any education. And this is interesting because these characters appear in other novels also, where the women might not have received education, but these women are, in a sense, they have this understanding of nature which the men don't have. And this is, important, and the narrator at this point is very angry at this particular situation.
So, friends, as the discussion comes to the end of the first story, we realize that there is a scene in front of us that evokes responses, and that tells us what to go into. And what Dr. Payal Nagpal has finally pointed out is the helplessness of the girl, even though she is not just sensitive, she is also educated, but not perhaps formally educated, but she has been educated in the school of life. She knows the flowers very well, she knows their qualities, their colors she enjoys, and she is a very sensitive person. So education of the kind that we have, that she has not got, but then she is quite wise, she is well informed, and she has a sense of taste. So this kind of a humanist angle that is there in the ordinary ignorant, supposedly ignorant people is really remarkable, and Turgenev should be standing out, in the view of the audience for that purpose. So we look forward to the next part of the discussion, which will be about the other story as is pointed out. Till then, thank you.